So today's talk, as Michelle said, is about courage. And for some reason, the universal image for courage is the heart. So this talk is on courage, which is defined in the dictionary. We always start with the dictionary definition is the ability to do something that frightens one, and the choice and willingness to confront agony, pain, danger, uncertainty, and intimidation. So I think I highlighted choice because I think for me that's very, very important. In a certain way, the way you build your career, you build yourself as an artist, as a person, is by choice. That's the thing you have control over in the face of uncertainty, which is one of the things that I fear the most. Or this is again a presentation of the Chronicles of an Illustrator Lost in Space, which is me. So one thing I knew when I was very little, but I didn't really know until I was in fourth year of the University of Architecture class, it was that I wanted to be an illustrator. And to be an illustrator, there's a certain amount of traits that you need. And first of all is you need courage. You need your calling. You need to know that's the thing that's going to drive your chest. It's going to drive you forward the whole time. Because the road to being an illustrator or any kind of, a lot of creative careers require this same set of skills or this same set of traits. It's because everybody's going to go on a train, on rails, in a very comfy ride somewhere else to become a lawyer, an economist, a veterinarian, a doctor. And you are going to have to head the other way into the unknown, and you're going to have to cut your own way. This is a machete, because I come from Costa Rica. And machetes is the way you cut your way through the jungle, right? And then you have to have drive, and you have to have feedback. The list is here. So, like I said, courage and calling. And you are a bit of a dissident, because everybody's going on one way, and the trail is it's already blazed and constructed for them. You have to blaze your own way. Then you have to manage your doubts on the way, because you're going to come into a lot of pitfalls in which you're going to doubt yourself. So staying focused, these are, in Costa Rica we call them, these are rubber boots that you use to walk through very rough terrain. And you're also on the way, the whole way, you cannot go blindly into the unknown. You always need feedback, okay? So it's a very, we're gonna look at it, but it's a very delicate balance between staying focused and being in a crazy kind of denial of, I'm just gonna do this, but it doesn't make sense, but I'm just gonna do this, versus always getting feedback, being open to feedback of people that give it to you constructively. So to tell you a little bit about myself, because I'm afraid that this talk is going to be very anecdotal, and it's very more intuitive than structured. I'm just going to go through the story. And this is Taiwan. This is where I was born. So that's me. And then we go. And then when I was 2 years old, my parents had the great idea of going. Does anybody recognize this country? This is Costa Rica. This is from a tiny country to another tiny country. And that's me when I was 2 years old. Okay. So living in Costa Rica, it made me immediately in a sort, like we said before about being dissident, it made me an outsider. It made me an outlier because I was living. Part of my life was inside the house, and part of my life was outside the house. And there were two very different identities. So if you, inside the house, I will have Chinese elements, like, Sun Wukong. And there's a lot of common elements that you will see. And the food is very similar in a way. The items that you will see at home, the culture, the Chinese New Year, and the Lucky Money. And then outside, I will have Paco y Lola, which is school textbook. And these characters that were completely different to what I would see as a child. We can keep going. And the toys and the artistic expression of the culture were totally. So also it's a Catholic country. There's a lot of soccer. And it was completely, not antagonistic, but it's very, very contrasting to the way I was brought up at home. So we turn into this thing, which is, this is me and my sisters. And this is like a very Latin American image of, the God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost somewhere. And then this is Costa Rican traditional dress. And it is a strange mixture of being Asian, but being Latin American at the same time, right? So we coined this, people coined it for it, what's called chiniticas. Chino is anything Chinese, and then they call anybody Asian Chino. And tica is Costa Rican. So we're chiniticas. coming from that, I knew from an early age, like, you know how children entertain themselves when they are bored or are by themselves. And the way I did is I drew. And I liked stories. And can we go another? So one of the toys I had as a kid, I don't know if there was something similar here, it's called calquitos, which is, they give you a background. This is a marine background, which was my favorite, but there was a different kinds of background, the space and normal day-to-day. And then they would give you stickers that you can put on top, and you would tell story. I would go and put them in and tell the stories, like little narratives or a continuous narrative the whole time. So the urge to do storytelling through visuals was very early on in me, just naturally, I guess. And then that set me up in the journey through the Great Pacific Ocean of not knowing anything into eating every kind of story that I would have in my way. Like, I remember there was an encyclopedia in my parents' house, and it was very dry and just dense. But the last one, number 14, had a section of Greek mythology, and I read the whole thing, I think at least 10 times. And then there's these folk tales from Chinese books. My parents would read to us when we were growing up, and then move on when teenage years ago to anime and manga, like everybody does, right? And then there was Dungeons and Dragons, which is, so through play, that's the thing, my relationship to the visuals was always through play, right? It's always through this ludic experience. And so these are the kind of images I would see. You can turn it around. Very Asian dragons for children and very Asian myths, right? And then the stories were great. They were a little bit insane. And then we move on to, again, manga and anime, which every teenager really likes. What happens is, in a universe where everything is dual, you start getting more facets. So you get, and you start getting more sophisticated storylines, right? And then Dungeons and Dragons, which is the world that goes into fantasy, right? In a way, my reality was uncomfortable in many ways. So fantasy is a way to forge your own reality, to forge your own comfort zone. When, being Chinese and being, Asian looking, and being a little bit younger than everybody else in class, I wouldn't say, but not bullied. But I was always a little bit ostracized, a little bit outside. So fantasy was my refuge, and this is my way of building courage to confront the world, to confront reality. And and through fantasy, I found the masters. That was Brian Froud. This is Arthur Rackham from the golden age of illustration. And then this is Edmond Dulac, which is to this day one of my big favorites. And these are the things that I would eat up as candy. This is just the things that just drove me to do more and more and more. And then I wouldn't say a lack, maybe it was lack of courage. As a teenager going from high school and finishing high school, what are you going to study? Are you going to be an artist, or you're going to die, poor, and you're not going to be able to sustain yourself? So architecture was a bit of a middle ground. My parents were like, okay, architecture is okay. Okay. So architecture was sort of okay, I'm going to go be designing, I'm going to be sketching buildings, which is a little bit drier. But in the end, it ended up being a very, very good experience. If you're open to experiences, life has this way of not letting you have exactly what you want, right? Because I want exactly that Easter bunny on the top of the shelf that's $1,000. And no, you can't have one egg. That's all you have, right? And I'm just talking Easter because it's the season. But the thing is, you make do. We say in Spanish, you hacer de tripas corazón, which is funny because it talks about the heart, is to make from intestines, you make a heart. So basically, with what you have, it's similar to if life gives you lemons, then you make lemonade, right? But I went to architecture. After architecture, I worked for Intel for 3 years. And I remember graduating from school, and my professor, the professor for my thesis, so what are you going to do? I was like, I'm going to work for Intel. And he said, I give you 3 months. and And then the thing is, 3 months turned into 3 years. Part of me, because I'm very, very stubborn. If somebody tells me you are not able to do something, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. I'm just going to do it. And I did learn certain things. And Intel is going to come back to the narrative. I know it's a bit of a strange thing, but a random thing, but it's going to come back in the narrative somehow. You'll see. And then, of course, after 3 years of working at Intel, I had a life crisis, right? Because that's what happens. And when you are affronted by a life crisis, it is the most terrifying thing. Somehow, chemistry inside your body tells you you're not going to survive. Or if, like, you have to lay low. You have to, like, do something, like, you have to fight back. But then what you do at that moment is what happened to me was I was going to get married, didn't. I was on this way of having, like, an Intel career, and I didn't. And all of those things were by choice. At that point where there was, like, absolute confusion. I had no idea who I was, where I was going, if what I was doing was right. And I just found inside of me the one thing that I knew I wanted to do for myself ever since I was a kid, and that was telling stories through drawing. So what I did is I jumped the gun. I burned down a bunch of bridges, and I went to Rhode Island, to the Rhode Island School of Design. I applied to a bunch of schools, and being me, I'm like, you always go between, like, the risk taker and the really, really conservative approach. So what I did is, like, the risk taker was like, I'm going to just throw everything away. I'm just going to go and study illustration. It didn't make sense because I was already an architect. I already worked for 3 years, and I was going back for another bachelor's degree. And people were like, what? Wait, you're not going for a master's? What is this? And you're going for what? For a bachelor's in what? In illustration. What is illustration? Is it a designer? No, it's not a designer. It's a different thing. And then, on the other hand, I wanted to make sure I would get into that new decision I made. So what I did is I applied to 3 top schools, 3 middle schools, like tier schools, and 3 lower tier schools. So if I didn't get to the top schools, I would get in the middle ones, and if I didn't, I would get into, like, the really bad ones. Like, at least I would be doing illustration. And luckily, I got into RISD. So this is me and my roommate's cat. And studying in RISD, student budget, being from somebody with a salary, somebody with a house that was getting bought and have a car and everything, you go back into a student budget. So that took courage. I don't want to, it feels like I'm self-congratulating myself, but it is a courageous choice. Like, but the good thing is, as a young person at that moment, the world is open. And if you look at it, you step back and you look at it and you think, okay, I'm young. Right now, I'm only responsible for myself, and I can pretty much do whatever I want. So the fear kind of washes away a little bit, and then it comes back. And so on my way to which I started when I was a kid, through the children's book, through the manga, through the illustrators that I was admiring the whole time, I kept moving, and I was like, okay, now I'm on my way. Now I'm on my way. And then I started doing illustrations. Well, I'm very good at, well, not very good. I used to draw a lot I'm a draftsman more than a painter. So I deal in lines. And watercolor was like the natural upgrade into color from line drawings. So watercolors, I did watercolors of fairies, as I said, like the continuation from fantasy. This was my comfort zone. This was where I was most comfortable, where I was happy, where I would play. And I would do a series like this, and to my mind, I was on my way. Oh, well, I'm just showing this in detail a little bit. These are very, very small. These are not too big. And like, as you see, they're like very classical. You can see a little bit Asian influence in it. A professor said I have a very Mesoamerican palette. So I don't know what that means, but apparently a lot of color is Mesoamerican. And then, yeah, and there's also a little European. So I was on my way to becoming the next Franz Frazetta. Do you know Franz Frazetta? He's like, yeah. So I'm like, oh my God, like the great fantasy illustrator, right? But a thunderbolt struck. And something just set me off, hurled me off into another crisis. And what struck was a professor. Like your life is made out of tiny moments where you were very, very, very fortunate to come across certain specific people that said or did a certain specific thing at that certain specific time. And it somehow turns into a crossroads, and that's where you get sort of kicked out of the way you were, the path you were on, right? So what happened is I was looking at this very nice illustration of the Lonesome Dragon, and it's a very tight, very detailed, very precise illustration of a dragon with a knight and all that stuff. And then she was just reading something else I had brought in, like, I don't know, it was assignment or something. And she said this one thing. She says, oh, you don't want to go so tight. She didn't even look up from her desk or whatever. And I was like, and it just, right there, it just shattered all my dreams. Because I was like, I was on my way onto doing this as a career. And she said, no, you don't want to do that. And I didn't, I just walked out. It was winter, it was Rhode Island, it was miserable. But I was like, okay, so what does she mean by it? I didn't say anything, it was very casual. But then what that did is that hurled me into, like, again, a big unknown of endless possibilities, which gives you a lot of anxiety. But what do you do then? You start working, and you do little experiments. Like, the whole time I was like, okay, so I'm here, I'm in school, I'm learning, and we're getting pushed to experiment, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to experiment, I'm going to toss my, very set way of thinking and set ideas of what I want to do, and I'm going to start doing different things. So I did pen and ink for a while, and I started doing the same illustrations in watercolors of fairy tales, but with a bit of a twist. This is the witch giving Snow White birth control pills, because, and then this is, instead of Thumbelina, it's like Pulgarcito in English, like the male version of Thumbelina with his fairy prince. So it's sort of like a twist to the same style, but giving it a more contemporary or more mature voice. And this is a 3D, just playing with, this is very small. All my things are very small. So, and a little bit of installation. This is a shrine to breast milk. I don't know, it's things that you do, crazy things. That's the thing. These are things that you do. A professor who said, one thing, that's another thing a professor said, it's like, what if? The big question I wake up every morning to when I sit down at my desk and I start doing watercolors. Because he was a master watercolorist, he would say, what if? What if today I use cadmium orange instead of alizarin crimson? Because I hate cadmium orange. I'm just going to use that color I hate, see what comes out of it. And I've always been very uncomfortable with digital, because I've always been very material about my work. And this is digital Photoshop. This is, again, digital work. And then this is mixed media, and then this is another mixed media. This one is bigger, which is also not comfortable for this, just pencils and oil paintings. This is just an example of the potpourri of things I was doing. This looks like a crazy person was doing art, because you're doing like a little bit here, a little bit there, and it's so counterintuitive when you want to be focused on your career, when everybody's looking for their own style. That's another big question for illustrators. If there's any illustrators in the crowd, is that, how do I get my style? That's the big question before getting out of school, or when you're starting out as an illustrator. How do I get my style? That's the question everybody asks any experienced illustrator. And you don't really develop a style. You're your own style. Whatever you do is going to come out as yourself. There's no escaping you, right? So this is paper cuts. And this is a story of my grandmother. My grandfather, from my father's side, he was in Taiwan as a professor. He was a teacher during the Japanese occupation. So he disappeared. He got caught into jail because he was teaching Chinese when he was not supposed to. And he got thrown into jail a number of times. So this is a story of them meeting up when they're young, and she visited him in the jail. And then he disappeared. So she would go to the rivers, to the riverbanks. When they pull out a lot of corpses, they would call people to come see if they could recognize. So she would look for him. And this is like, she wanted to suicide. But then my father came with a little crab that he found in the riverside. And he's like, Mom, can we take it home and bring him up and have it big? And that gave her hope for some reason. It's just one of those things and that's how she went on going. So this is like a very harsh story of a very harsh reality using paper cuts, which is a traditional media, folk media, and it sort of removes you from, and I bring this story, I'm stopping at this story because it's about courage too. This is like the harshest reality one could encounter, I think, one of the harshest. And by bringing it to people in this way, it gives people the courage to go and see what it's about, because it removes the graphic unpleasant, the graphic pain and just despair, and it sort of makes it sweeter, and then once you're in, it's like a trap. You're already in the candy, but it doesn't taste sweet. Now what is it? Is it bitter? I'm gonna have to deal with it, so yeah. I do that to myself too. I trick myself into these big projects, and then in the middle of the whole thing, I'm painting away, and I was like, why do I do these things to myself? But eventually you pull back in the end, you push forward, and this is another experiment. This is just a scroll of eel that drinks seawater, and in the end, it just poops hearts, I guess. And this is just to prove that, if you go on another one, that no experience in your life is gonna go, is gonna go independently into the nothingness. Like, this is intel all over the place, right? Like, whatever you do intuitively would bring out your own experience. So there's no escaping your own experience through the whole thing. I'm sorry, English is not my first language, so I go back and forth. Okay, so once you're done with all of this, all this body of work, all this experimentation, and all this randomness, you're suddenly faced with graduation. And then you get hurled again into like the unknown, because once you graduate in this safe space as a student, and then you graduate, and then you go into the mouths of this monster that's called promotion. Like, you have to learn how to self-promote. And it is very hard to do when you're an artist or a designer or any kind, because you are so focused on your work that going out there and selling yourself, selling your work, promoting it, it's very, very hard. It's very anti-natural for us, for a lot of us. So you sort of like try to kill the monster with a sword, and then what you do is what I did. Tools that you have, weapons that you have in order to bring down this monster is word of mouth. So you talk to people. Like, my first job was through word of mouth. It was the mom of the girlfriend of a friend of another friend. So that's how it goes. And then another one was the friend of a professor, so that was more direct. Then portfolio. You have to set up a good portfolio of 12 to 20 pieces, and they have to be the best of the best of the best of your work. Your portfolio is only as good as the weakest piece that you have in there. Okay? The art director is not going to focus on your best work, he's going to focus on your worst work. And he's going to be like, okay, this is what I get from this guy consistently when he's tired, when he hasn't slept for 3 days, hasn't eaten for a week, et cetera, and has been only on coffee for ages. But you also have to send it. It's funny, you can set up your portfolio, and the part that takes most courage is to actually send it to people. And to get rejection letter after rejection letter after rejection letter, or just silence. I think silence is worse than rejection letter, sorry. I tripped over those words because it's too hard for me. Then catalogs and agencies. Agencies and catalogs are a little bit further down your road. When you're already a little bit more established, you had a couple of more jobs, because some agencies won't take very, very young illustrators. What they say is because they want you to be out on the streets doing the self-promoting so that you appreciate more what they are doing for you. And I'm like, that's kind of punitive, but okay. That's what the agency told us when we were students. Then competitions, this was big for me. And right now, if you don't have online presence as a creative, it's a little bit harsh. Like, there's a lot of, internet is great and it's horrible and very different, at the same time. But the thing is, what's great about it, it's making the ways we can find work it just exploded the whole thing. It used to be that you have a certain way. You talk to an art director, you send them your portfolio. They say, okay, we'll send you a job. This is your job. And you just keep on, your venue to work was through art directors, right? And for smaller publishers, it was for editors. Now it's through anybody that's looking in your Instagram or your Twitter or your Tumblr or whatever. And it's not, there's more one-on-one. Like, for example, there's more direct between you and the clients, the potential. Like, for example, a lot of people I know, they don't even have a publisher, they don't have an agent, they don't have anything. They just go directly to their viewers, right? They make stuff that their viewers want or their public wants. And they don't have to go through that art director saying, no, this is good enough, this is not good enough, right? Or having like a say on what's the aesthetic for certain publication. People just can publish things by themselves in collective crowdfunding. Out of this is very, very important. And there's no, if we don't keep up, we're gonna get left behind. So, and okay, back to the searching for style and the idea of how do I do this when there's no manual. So through the things I knew that I was actually good, kind of okay at, I got a certain, like some jobs. This is a job that was the mom of a girlfriend, a friend, right? So this is just classical watercolor fairy tales, and then this is line art. And this is just a coffee illustration for a little coffee company in Hawaii. And this is for that mom. She would publish this book about the stories that she used to tell to her kids, and it went to a foundation for children in need. And this is my first portfolio. And this is, as you can see, very academic, very classical, like illustration. It's a very Edmund Dulac influenced, and very. There's always Asian influence. There's no way you can escape it. It's very funny. In Costa Rica, people would say, "Oh, your work is so Asian," and in Asia, people would say, "Your work is so, I don't know, it's so somewhere else." But yeah, and then you go. These are pen and inks I did for this portfolio, gave me my first professional job. Okay, so because those were word of mouth, sort of like one-time thing. This is an editorial. An editor, sorry, because in Spanish it's editorial. This is a publisher in the States that do, because for some reason, naturally, my work tended towards spirituality. I guess because of fantasy, which is funny and ironic because I'm an atheist and I'm the most skeptical person there is, but they hired me for these things, okay? These are like, these are very small. These were like for the book, for the inside of books, and we can go another one. These are all very, very small. And they liked it. And they have been hiring me for ages. And this is stuff I would do with other artists. This is a writer and a printmaker. And they were boyfriend and girlfriend back then. And he wrote the story about Sebastian and his 16 deaths. And I would illustrate them. And she make, there's a sample here of the little book. And yeah. So then they broke up and the project didn't. Well, it came out, but from all of this, where am I going? What am I doing? Where is my destination? What do I want to do? And then, even if it's things that it was like a set trajectory, it kept going back to that fateful moment when I was told to, not go so tight. And that was exactly what I was doing. I was going tighter and tighter and tighter. My things were getting more refined, more polished, more precious, and that's not what you want to do. You want to break that mold. And so, this is very random, and again, those random moments in your life that just are a click. I was in Costa Rica, in the Caribbean, at the beach. I was getting ready and thinking about all these things, because you think about all these things, even if you're in the shower or if you're in vacation. I'm sitting there on the beach, and I'm thinking about some professor telling me, your responsibility as a painter is this square of your painting, and the corners are the most important things. And I'm sitting there, everybody's having a grand time, and I'm thinking about the corners of my painting. So it's a little bit crazy. And then, sorry. And then at this room, as I was getting ready, this is a mola. Mola is textile art, and it's from the Caribbean in Panama, and it's from the people called the Cuna. And these are the women who make this. This is a matriarchy, and they make this very beautiful reverse quiltings. And I went back and because that moment was like, this is something that's going to not allowed me to go into details. This is not going to allow me to be precious about it, to be figurative. I'm going to have to synthesize form into this, which is flat and just hard lines and colors and layers. And they are just amazing. Like, I really, really draw a lot of inspiration from it. And I went home, of course. I bought a bunch of textiles, and I did my own version, which was pretty bad, so it ended up, getting tossed. I sent it to your friend who just had a baby. He was like, yeah. He's like, I love it. Can I have it? Yes, please. Just get it out of my sight because I didn't like it. And then, so what do I do now? That didn't work out. And then you go and remember the paper cuts from when I was a kid and the paper cuts I did from school. And then I was like, okay, this method, you see traditional paper cuts, and this is also going to make me have to go into flatness, maybe have to go into solid color, sorry, or colored versions. And then I came up with this. And this was finally something that I was like, oh, okay, this is finally something that I can live with. Like, I can live with myself if I do this. It's okay. Like, it's not. And then I kept on doing it, and I kept on doing. This is transferring it a little bit to the world of, to Costa Rica and my Costa Rican experience, because this is a traditional Chinese paper cut method, but this is a coatimundi, a pisote, which is from Costa Rica, and this is a red-eyed tree frog, which is a Costa Rican animal. And it's sort of like a tropicalization of the technique. This is a black woman from the Caribbean in Costa Rica, and this is her sambo kid, which is half black and half native Costa Rican. And then the story of him being in the Caribbean, having lost his father, and finding his father again in his own culture, in his father's culture later on, okay? So I was on a good way, and this came up with my second portfolio. That one was from women's spirituality and pagan and neo-Wiccan and stuff. This is for children's books. And I still, you question yourself the whole time, and this is where self-doubt is good. Self-doubt can be a crippling thing. You go into self-doubt, you don't do anything, you just go play video games. Because it's like, it's so crippling, you're like, it's not even worth it. But then it also gives you, on the other side of the coin, it gives you this urge to always question what you're doing. What am I doing? Where am I going? What if, again? And then what if, oh, it doesn't show. What if I took the failed mola right here, right? And what if I took the paper cuts right here and I make this? And that's what I did. And that was 100 times better than the one I did in textiles, and it is completely different than the paper cut, Chinese paper cut tradition I was coming from. And this was one of those moments like, oh my God, I got this. And so this gave me a big breath of air and pushed my little ship into the competition. And this competition was run in Japan. Unfortunately, it's not there anymore because apparently economy went into crisis. But I came up with these. And this is the story of a Guna girl and a Chinese girl being immigrants in Panama City. Because you would see both populations in Panama City, and this is her culture, the Chinese culture, and this is her culture, the Guna culture, coming together. So this won the grand prize for that competition, which was a big, big, big deal. Because after that, this is the Tree of Life. The legends, again, I went to look at their legends, at their myth, and it's so rich. It comes out, you come up with, there's nothing new to be invented under the sun. That's what another professor used to say. What you do is that you retell stories that have already been told. You do your own versions of things that have already been created. And it is the way you tell them, again, like the Chinese culture coming up within like the Kuna environment, and then go again. And then that's, because of that prize, I was able to skip forward from a lot of the self-promotion years that we have to go through as illustrators, and I got a bunch of books contracts from it. So this was for India, this was for Guatemala, this was for India again, and this was Costa Rica, and there's one in Nicaragua, but it's not here. And the thing is, people would contact me for the paper cuts. This was what people wanted me for. They wanted me the paper cuts, the colors. And for some reason, my own voice about, like, that came out by itself, because a lot of us would try to, and I did that too, you would try to mimic what you see in illustration magazines, what you see is getting published in Europe or in the US, which is a more tame palette, a more limited palette. And what actually came out when I did things naturally was just a lot of color and a lot of, just a lot of color. So it's not good for an European audience, but it is good for an Indian audience. It's good for a Chinese audience. Some of the books got translated into Chinese. Another book got translated into Korean because it's good for different audiences. There's a whole wide world around there. So a lot of my friends would focus on sending portfolios to the US publishers. And it's good, because that's where a big market is. But you have to also think, okay, if you have to send something to, I don't know, Argentina or Mexico or Brazil or anywhere in Asia or anywhere in, say, Australia, there's a big Australian book market there, and Canada. Like, there's a lot of things to go around. And this is for Guatemala. This is the story about a tree that got sick of just being a tree, and he just pulled out his roots and started walking around the world because, why not? And that's him pulling out the... And it's a story about immigration. It's a story about where you've been from, where you grew up from, and you suddenly take this whole thing that is your life, and you just uproot it, and you move somewhere else for whatever reason, but that takes a lot of courage too. I think that's one of the most courage. And this one got into Colombia's Funda Lectura list, and Cata got, I don't know, there's a bunch of, this one got, oh, this is for younger kids. This is the how to measure an elephant. Can go again. How to weigh an elephant. Sorry, and this was for Kata. This is a foundation in India, and they work with children in social risk. So they have schools and they publish books for them. And can we go? This is Costa Rican. This is proper Costa Rican. This is about turtles being born in Tortuguero, which is a national park for sea turtles. And this is El Cuento Fantasma. This got a prize in, I think, a memorable. This is a book that was in Braille, and the book didn't know that he thought he was empty, and because he thought he was empty, then he didn't want anybody to read it until a girl that could not see came over and she read the book in Braille. And it got translated. It got a mention in Bibiana, and then it got translated into Japanese and Korean, I think. And then now that, because you could say that's a more consolidated career, but then now what? Again, what if, right? And now, because after 10 years of doing paper cuts, you kind of don't want to do paper cuts anymore, right? And that's what happened to me. I don't want to do paper cuts anymore. And you start experimenting again. So that phase, when I was in school, I can have the comfort now to find again the safe place to start experimenting and being like risk-taking in art. And we're doing here it's embroidery on paper, and again embroidery on paper. These are so small. These are about this size. And seeing them projected this big is kind of unnerving. But this is about trade of species, of wild species, and collage, a little bit of collage. And these are all done in Hanoi, by the way. These are all magazines from the supermarkets. And and this is Ophelia, and that's it. So this has been my journey, and I'm sure I left a lot of things untold or unsaid, but if you have any questions, and I think this one. So this has been my journey.